Zara's trembling fingers clutched her boarding pass as the gate agent's sneer cut deeper than any knife. "I don't care who your father supposedly is, you two aren't getting on this flight," he hissed, loud enough for everyone to hear. The identical twins exchanged glances, knowing exactly what was happening again. When Zara finally unlocked her phone, her sister Nia whispered, "Do it." Neither girl could have imagined that this single call wouldn't just get them home. It would ground every plane in Mid-Atlantic Airlines' fleet and expose decades of systematic discrimination. Before we dive into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from, and if you believe in standing up for justice, hit that like and subscribe button to stay updated on more stories that expose the truth in our society. 17-year-old identical twins Zara and Nia Jackson stood patiently in line at Denver International Airport, excitement bubbling beneath their composed exteriors. As honors students at Wellington Prep, this college tour trip to Boston represented more than just visiting potential universities. For the first time, their protective father, Marcus Jackson, had allowed them to travel alone, a sign of his growing trust in their independence. What the busy travelers rushing past them couldn't possibly know was that Marcus Jackson wasn't just any concerned parent. He was the newly appointed CEO of Mid-Atlantic Airlines, a position he'd deliberately kept private to shield his family from unwanted attention and, more importantly, to allow him to assess the company's culture without the artificial deference his title would command. The twins had first-class tickets, a practical decision their father had made to ensure they'd be comfortable and well looked after, not a display of privilege or wealth. Dressed in comfortable hoodies, jeans, and clean but well-worn sneakers, they looked like typical teenagers heading out on an adventure, their identical faces framed by neat box braids, excitement shining in their dark brown eyes. The line at the Mid-Atlantic check-in counter moved steadily forward until the twins reached the front. The white agent, a man whose name tag identified him as Trevor Reynolds, looked straight through them to the passengers standing behind. "Next," he called out, completely ignoring the two black teenagers directly in front of him. A middle-aged white couple stepped around the twins, apparently assuming they weren't actually in line, and Trevor immediately began processing their tickets with a friendly smile. "Heading to Chicago today? Wonderful city this time of year." Nia cleared her throat politely. "Excuse me, sir. We were next in line." Trevor's smile vanished instantly, his eyes narrowing as he finally acknowledged their presence. "You'll have to wait your turn," he said curtly, continuing to tap away at his keyboard for the couple he was helping. "But we were next," Zara said, her voice calm but firm. "We've been standing here for 15 minutes. Trevor's jaw tightened. "I'll be with you when I'm ready." The twins exchanged glances. This wasn't the first time they'd experienced this particular brand of invisibility, but it stung nonetheless. They waited as Trevor deliberately took his time with the couple, making small talk about Chicago attractions while shooting occasional glances at the twins, a subtle smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. After the couple departed, 3 more white passengers were helped before Trevor finally, reluctantly motioned the twins forward. "Tickets and ID," he snapped, not making eye contact. Zara placed their first-class boarding passes and student IDs on the counter. Trevor's eyebrows shot up as he examined the tickets. "First class? Are you sure you're at the right counter?" His tone suggested they must have made a mistake. "Yes, our father purchased these tickets for us," Nia explained calmly. "We're visiting colleges in Boston." Trevor picked up their boarding passes between his thumb and forefinger, as if they might be contaminated. "These don't look right. Where did you get these?" His implication was clear. He suspected the tickets were fraudulent. "Our father purchased them directly from the airline," Zara said, her patience beginning to wear thin. "Is there a problem?" Trevor's lips pressed into a thin line. "I'll need to verify these, and I'll need additional identification. Student IDs aren't sufficient." Behind them, the line was growing longer. People were starting to stare. "We're 17, Nia explained. "We don't have driver's licenses yet. Our father was told student IDs would be sufficient for domestic travel when he booked the tickets." Trevor sighed dramatically. "Well, someone told your father wrong. Wait here." He disappeared into a back office with their tickets and IDs. The twins stood awkwardly at the counter for nearly 15 minutes, while other agents continued to help passengers who had arrived after them. They could hear occasional laughter from the office where Trevor had disappeared. Finally, he returned, slapping down 2 boarding passes and their IDs. There was an error in the system, he announced loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. You've been reassigned to economy, boarding gate 32. Zara examined the boarding passes, her brow furrowing. But these aren't the seats RE. Father booked. We're supposed to be in first class. Trevor leaned forward, lowering his voice. Listen, I don't know what kind of scam you two are trying to pull, but certain people need to understand that first class isn't for everyone. You should be grateful you're getting on the plane at all. His emphasis on certain people made his meaning unmistakable. Nia, always quicker to anger than her sister, opened her mouth to respond, but Zara placed a warning hand on her arm. They'd been taught that righteous anger from young black women was too often weaponized against them. Our father specifically booked first-class tickets, Zara insisted, keeping her voice steady. I'd like to speak to a supervisor, please. Trevor's face hardened. Supervisor's busy. If you have a problem with your seats, you can take it up at the gate. Next. He waved impatiently to the people behind them. Humiliated and angry, the twins collected their altered boarding passes and moved away from the counter. We should call Dad, Nia whispered. No, Zara replied, though it took all her willpower not to reach for her phone. He has that big board meeting today, remember? He specifically asked us not to call unless it was an emergency. This feels like an emergency. To me, Nia muttered, but she knew her sister was right. Their father had worked incredibly hard to reach his position, and they didn't want to disturb him over something they could handle themselves. We'll get it sorted at the gate, Zara assured her, though doubt crept into her voice. Let's just get through security first. Neither girl noticed Trevor watching them with a smug smile as they walked away, nor did they see him pick up a phone and make a quick call. Yeah, it's Trevor. 2 black teenagers, identical twins, trying to pull a fast one with first class tickets. I bumped them back to economy, but you might want to keep an eye out. Something doesn't feel right about them. He hung up, satisfied that he'd done his part to maintain what he considered the proper order of things. The security checkpoint loomed ahead, a bottleneck of humanity shuffling through the TSA's elaborate screening process. The twins joined the line, still discussing how they would handle the ticket situation at the gate, when they noticed a pattern forming. White passenger after white passenger passed through the standard screening with minimal fuss, barely breaking stride as they collected their belongings on the other side. Then came their turn. Randomly selected for additional screening, announced TSA agent Vanessa Miller with a smirk that suggested there was nothing random about it. The twins were directed to a separate lane where they would be subjected to enhanced security measures. Is this really necessary? Zara asked politely. We have a flight to catch, and we're already running behind schedule. Vanessa's expression hardened. Are you questioning security protocols? Because I can make this a lot more difficult if you'd prefer. Her hand hovered meaningfully over her radio, a clear threat that she could escalate the situation at any moment. No, ma'am, Nia replied quickly, shooting her sister a warning glance. We understand. Vanessa motioned for them to place their carry-ons on a separate table. Everything out of the bags. Everything. The twins complied, carefully removing their neatly packed belongings. Zara winced as Vanessa roughly yanked out her laptop, scraping it against the table's edge. Careful, please. That has all my schoolwork on it, she said before she could stop herself. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. If you're concerned about your property, maybe you shouldn't be flying. I can deny you passage right now if you continue to interfere with security procedures. Her voice carried, drawing attention from nearby travelers. Nia placed a calming hand on her sister's arm as Vanessa continued her inspection, deliberately rough as she pawed through their carefully folded clothes, reading private notes in their journals, and even opening a sealed envelope containing Zara's medication, spilling pills across the table. What are these? She demanded, as if she'd discovered illicit drugs instead of prescribed allergy medication. Fexofenadine, Zara explained. For my allergies, the prescription information is right there on the bottle. Vanessa ignored her explanation, setting the medication aside for further inspection before moving on to their personal items. While this was happening, another agent approached. Arms out, feet apart, the second agent instructed. We need to conduct a pat-down. The pat-down was nothing short of humiliating. The agent's hands were rough, invasive, lingering in ways that made both girls intensely uncomfortable. Nearby, Vanessa made loud comments about their hair. Always have to check these elaborate hairstyles, she announced to no one in particular. You wouldn't believe what people try to hide in there. Several other TSA agents chuckled, as if sharing an inside joke. A white woman in line noticed what was happening and began recording with her phone. Almost immediately, a TSA supervisor appeared beside her. Ma'am, recording security procedures is prohibited. Delete that video immediately. This is wrong, the woman protested. Those girls aren't doing anything to warrant this treatment. Delete the video or I'll be forced to detain you for questioning, the supervisor threatened. Your choice. Reluctantly, the woman complied, shooting an apologetic look toward the twins as she put her phone away. By the time the enhanced screening was complete, nearly 45 minutes had passed. The twins' belongings had been carelessly repacked. Zara's laptop was visibly scratched, and they were now dangerously close to missing their flight. Have a nice trip, Vanessa said with mock sweetness as they gathered their disheveled possessions. Better hurry. I hear they're strict about boarding times at gate 32. As they rushed away, Nia pulled out her phone. We need to call Dad now. This has gone beyond ridiculous. Zara checked the time and shook her head. He's in that closed-door session with the board right now. His assistant said he couldn't be disturbed for any reason. We'll handle this ourselves and tell him everything when he calls to check on us tonight. Shaken but determined, they hurried toward their gate, unaware that their ordeal was just beginning. Have you ever experienced discrimination while traveling? Comment number 1. If you've faced unfair treatment at security checkpoints like Zara and Nia. Or comment number 2 if you've witnessed it happening to someone else. Don't forget to like this video if you believe everyone deserves to be treated with dignity. And subscribe to hear more stories of courage in the face of injustice. What do you think is waiting for these brave young women at the restaurant? Will anyone stand up for them? Or are they completely alone in their fight against discrimination? With their boarding time still an hour away, the twins decided to stop at Sky High Grill, an airport restaurant advertising quick service and quality food. Their earlier excitement about the trip had evaporated, replaced by a gnawing anxiety, and more immediately, hunger. The restaurant was busy but not packed, with several empty tables clearly visible from the entrance. The hostess, a blonde woman whose name tag read Melissa Carter, looked up from her phone as they approached. Her smile faded the moment she saw them. How many? She asked, her tone noticeably cooler than it had been for the white family she just seated. 2, please, Zara replied. Melissa made a show of checking her tablet. There's going to be about a 45-minute wait for a table, she announced, not bothering to look up. Nia glanced pointedly at the empty tables clearly visible throughout the restaurant. But there are at least 5 empty tables right there, she said, keeping her voice polite but firm. Melissa's lips thinned. Those are reserved, she replied curtly. The twins exchanged knowing glances. This wasn't their first encounter with the reserved table excuse. Your website says you don't take reservations, Zara pointed out, pulling up the restaurant's page on her phone as evidence. It says right here. Sky High Grill does not accept reservations. Seating is first come, first served. Melissa's face flushed. Well, the website is outdated. We do take reservations now, and all those tables are spoken for. As if on cue, a white couple walked in behind the twins. Without even acknowledging the twins' ongoing conversation, Melissa brightened immediately. 2, right this way, please. She grabbed 2 menus and led the couple to one of the supposedly reserved tables. Nia felt her temper rising. Excuse me, she called after Melissa. We were here first, and you just told us there were no tables available. Melissa turned, her expression hardening. Is there a problem? Yes, there's a problem, Nia replied. her patience wearing thin. "You just told us all the tables were reserved, then immediately seated people who came in after us." Before Melissa could respond, a man in a button-up shirt and tie approached. His name tag identified him as Keith Dawson, manager. "Is everything all right here, Melissa?" he asked, though his gaze was fixed suspiciously on the twins. "These girls are causing a disruption," Melissa said quickly. "I explained that we have a waiting list, but they're demanding immediate seating." "That's not what happened," Zara interjected. "Your hostess told us there's a 45-minute wait, but there are empty tables, and she just seated people who came in after us." Keith's expression didn't change. He hadn't taken his eyes off the twins since he'd arrived, hadn't even glanced at the empty tables or the newly seated couple. "I understand you're upset, but I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voices. We have customers trying to enjoy their meals." His tone suggested they were shouting, though both girls had been speaking calmly. "We're not being loud," Nia objected. "We simply want to be treated fairly. If you continue to make a scene, I'll be forced to call security," Keith threatened, folding his arms across his chest. "Airport regulations allow us to refuse service to disruptive individuals." From nearby, a Latina waitress watched the interaction with growing concern. She approached cautiously. "Keith, I can take them at one of my tables. Number 12 just opened up." "Stay out of this, Elena," Keith snapped without looking at her. "Go check on your other tables." Elena Rodriguez hesitated, clearly torn between following her manager's orders and doing what she knew was right. With an apologetic glance at the twins, she retreated, disappearing into the kitchen. "Look," Keith said, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "I suggest you find somewhere else to eat. We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone, and right now you're not welcome here." The message was clear. Their kind wasn't welcome. It had nothing to do with reservations or waiting lists. Hungry, frustrated, and increasingly demoralized, the twins turned to leave. As they walked away, they overheard Keith commending Melissa. "Good job. Can't let them think they can just walk in and get whatever they want." Outside the restaurant, Nia fought back angry tears. "I'm so sick of this, every single time." Zara put her arm around her sister's shoulders. "I know. But we can't let them win by breaking us down. We'll grab something from a vending machine and then get this ticket situation straightened out." As they started to walk away, a voice called out behind them. "Wait!" Elena Rodriguez hurried toward them, glancing nervously over her shoulder to ensure Keith wasn't watching. She pressed 2 vouchers into Zara's hand. "For the food court. It's not much, but..." She hesitated, then pulled out her phone. "Look, I saw what happened in there. It happens all the time. Keith and Melissa do this to black customers constantly. If you're going to file a complaint, I'll be a witness. Here's my number." She quickly typed her contact information into Zara's phone. "I have to get back before they notice I'm gone, but please, don't let them get away with this." With another nervous glance toward the restaurant, Elena hurried back inside. The twins stood there, momentarily stunned by this unexpected act of allyship. It was a small kindness, but in that moment, it meant everything. "Maybe we're not completely alone after all," Nia said softly, some of her former spirit returning. Armed with the food vouchers and a renewed sense of determination, they headed for the food court, unaware that the worst of their ordeal was yet to come. By the time Zara and Nia approached Gate 32, they had managed to eat a quick meal and regroup emotionally. Checking the time, they noticed that privileged boarding for first-class passengers had already begun. After their experience at check-in, they had visited a customer service desk where a harried agent had reluctantly corrected their boarding passes back to first class after verifying their ticket information. She had offered no explanation or apology for the error, simply handing over the new boarding passes with barely concealed impatience. Now, with proper boarding passes in hand, they approached the gate with cautious optimism. Perhaps the worst was behind them. They couldn't have been more wrong. The gate agent, a middle-aged white man whose name tag identified him as Richard Whitman, was directing first-class passengers through the boarding lane when the twins presented their passes. His welcoming smile vanished instantly as he examined their tickets. "There seems to be a problem here," he said, his voice loud enough to draw attention from nearby passengers. "Please step aside while I verify these boarding passes." Nia's patience had worn dangerously thin. "What problem? We've already had our seats changed once today without explanation. The customer service desk just fixed them. What possible issue could there be now?" Richard's eyes narrowed. "I'm going to need to see some identification," he demanded, ignoring her question entirely. "And please keep your voice down." The twins produced their student IDs once again. Richard inspected them with exaggerated scrutiny, turning them over repeatedly, holding them up to the light as if checking for watermarks, all while continuing to process other first-class passengers with barely a glance at their documentation. "These don't look legitimate," he finally declared. "Student IDs can be easily fabricated." "They're official IDs from Wellington Preparatory Academy," Zara explained, struggling to maintain her composure. "They have the school seal, our photos, everything. The airline confirmed they were sufficient ID for domestic travel when our father booked the tickets." Richard's response was to reach for the PA system microphone. "Security to gate 32, please. Security to gate 32. The announcement echoed through the terminal, causing nearby passengers to stare and whisper. Several pulled out phones and began recording the confrontation. "This is discrimination," Nia stated firmly, no longer willing to pretend this was all just a series of unfortunate misunderstandings. "We have legitimate tickets and ID. You're delaying us because we're black. That's illegal." Richard's face flushed red. "That's a serious accusation, young lady. I could have you removed from this airport for making false claims against airline personnel. I'm simply following security protocols." "Which protocols specifically require you to announce a security need when there isn't one?" Zara challenged. "Or to scrutinize our school IDs while barely glancing at other passengers' identification?" Before Richard could respond, a new voice entered the conversation. "What seems to be the problem here, Richard?" The woman who approached was perhaps in her 50s, with dark skin and her hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her name tag identified her as Diane Blackett's supervisor. The twins felt a surge of hope. Surely another black woman would understand what was happening and intervene on their behalf. "These two are attempting to board with first-class tickets that appear to be fraudulent," Richard explained, his tone suggesting he was dealing with hardened criminals rather than teenage girls. "And they're making accusations of discrimination to try to intimidate me into letting them board." Diane smiled tightly at the twins. "Let me see what's going on here." She examined their boarding passes and IDs, then motioned for them to step aside with her, away from the line and the curious onlookers. "Richard, continue boarding. I'll handle this." For a moment, alone with Diane, the twins allowed themselves to hope. "Thank you," Nia began. "We've been dealing with this kind of treatment since we arrived at the airport, and we're just trying to get to Boston to visit colleges." Diane's friendly demeanor changed the instant they were out of earshot of the other passengers. Her voice dropped to a harsh whisper. "Listen to me carefully. I don't know what game you two think you're playing, but you need to understand how things work. People like us need to know how to behave if we want to be treated equally." The betrayal hit like a physical blow. "People like us," Zara repeated incredulously. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," Diane continued, her voice still low, "that making a scene and throwing around accusations of discrimination isn't going to get you what you want. It just confirms what they already think about us. You need to be twice as polite, twice as patient, twice as perfect." "That's the reality. But we haven't done anything wrong," Nia protested. "We've been polite and patient while being discriminated against at every turn." Diane's expression hardened further. "Do you think I got to be a supervisor by calling out every microaggression? By making a scene every time someone made assumptions about me? This is the real world, not some social justice Twitter thread." She looked down at their boarding passes again. "I'm going to let you board, but consider this a warning. I don't want to hear about you causing trouble on my airlines. You understand me?" Without waiting for a response, she led them back to the gate where Richard was watching with undisguised displeasure. "Their documentation checks out," Diane informed him coldly. "They can board." Richard's lips pressed into a thin line. but he reluctantly stepped aside. As the twins moved toward the jet bridge, Diane's words echoed in their minds. The betrayal from someone who should have been an ally stung perhaps more deeply than the original discrimination. They boarded in silence, both wrestling with the implications of Diane's warning and the exhausting reality it represented. What they didn't know was that their ordeal was far from over. At the end of the jet bridge, one final gatekeeper awaited. The twins had barely taken 2 steps onto the jet bridge when they encountered yet another obstacle. A tall, broad-shouldered man in a Mid-Atlantic Airlines uniform stood blocking their path, examining boarding passes with cursory glances before waving passengers through. His name tag read, Gregory Walsh. When Zara and Nia presented their tickets, his demeanor instantly changed. "I'm going to need you two to step aside," he said, making no effort to lower his voice. "There seems to be an issue with your tickets." Passengers behind them were forced to navigate around the impromptu checkpoint Gregory had created. "What issue?" Zara asked, fatigue evident in her voice. "We've already had our tickets verified multiple times." Gregory's expression remained impassive. "I've received a system alert indicating suspicious activity associated with your reservation. I need to run some additional checks before I can allow you to board." "What kind of suspicious activity?" Nia demanded. "We're high school students going to visit colleges. What could possibly be suspicious about that?" Gregory ignored her question entirely. "Please step aside and wait while I continue boarding." Other passengers, with no choice but to comply or risk further escalation, the twins moved to the side of the jet bridge. They watched as passenger after passenger was waved through with barely a glance at their documentation. Minutes stretched into a quarter hour, then half an hour. The once busy flow of boarding passengers dwindled to a trickle, then stopped altogether. Throughout this time, Gregory made several calls on his radio, speaking too quietly for them to hear, occasionally glancing in their direction with what looked suspiciously like satisfaction. Finally, as the last passengers disappeared into the aircraft, Gregory approached them. "I'm afraid there's been a development," he announced, not bothering to hide his smirk. "The flight is now completely full and overbooked. Your seats have been reassigned to passengers in good standing." "That's impossible," Zara protested. "We have confirmed first-class tickets. You can't just give our seats away." "I'm afraid I can," Gregory countered. "Airline policy allows for passenger reassignment in cases of security concerns or overbooking. In this case, both conditions apply." "What security concerns?" Nia asked, her voice rising in frustration. "We've done nothing wrong. We've cooperated with every unreasonable demand since we arrived at this airport. This is blatant discrimination." At the word discrimination, Gregory's face hardened. He reached for his radio. "Security to Jet Bridge 32. Passenger issue." Within minutes, 2 security guards appeared. Their name badges identified them as Tom Bennett and Frank Miller. Both men approached with hands resting near their weapons, as if the 2 teenage girls represented some kind of threat. "What seems to be the problem here?" Tom asked, addressing Gregory rather than the twins. "These 2 are refusing to accept that they've been denied boarding," Gregory explained, painting a completely false picture of the situation. "They're becoming aggressive and making accusations against airline staff." "We are not being aggressive," Zara insisted, struggling to keep her voice calm. "We're simply trying to understand why our confirmed seats were given away after we were deliberately delayed here." Frank, the larger of the 2 guards, stepped forward. "The computer randomly selects passengers for denial of boarding when flights are overbooked, nothing personal." The smirk that accompanied this obvious lie made it clear that there was nothing random about it. Nia, pushed beyond endurance, pulled out her phone. "I'm recording this. We've been systematically discriminated against from the moment we entered this airport, and we have evidence of it." Tom's hand shot out toward her phone. "Recording security procedures is prohibited in the airport. I'll need to confiscate that device." "This isn't a security procedure," Zara protested. "You're trying to cover up discrimination by citing fake security concerns." "That's a serious accusation," Frank said, his voice dropping to a threatening level. "One that could result in both of you being detained for questioning. Is that what you want?" The implied threat hung in the air. Detention would mean missing any chance of reaching Boston today. Their father's careful planning, their college visits, all would be disrupted. Worst of all, they'd be completely at the mercy of a system that had already proven itself biased against them at every turn. "Fine," Zara finally said, placing a restraining hand on her sister's arm. "We'll leave, but this isn't over." "It is for today," Gregory replied with undisguised satisfaction. "Your seats are gone, the flight is boarding, and you two aren't getting on it. I suggest you find another way to Boston, or just go home." Under the watchful eyes of the security guards, the twins were escorted away from the gate as the final boarding call for their flight was announced over the PA system. They walked in silence, the weight of defeat pressing down on them. Every step they'd taken through this airport had been met with resistance, prejudice, and obstruction. They'd been patient, they'd been polite, they'd followed the rules, and, still, they'd been denied the basic dignity and service that every other passenger seemed to receive without question. As the sounds of their flight preparing for departure reached them, Nia turned to her sister, tears of frustration welling in her eyes. "We have to call Dad. Now." This time Zara didn't argue. "Have you ever reached your breaking point when facing injustice? Comment number 1 if you believe there comes a time when staying silent is no longer an option, or comment number 2 if you think the twins should have kept trying to work within the system. If you're outraged by what these young women have endured, hit that like button to show your support for standing up against discrimination. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that expose the harsh realities many face every day. What do you think will happen when their father learns how his daughters have been treated? Will he believe them, or will he become yet another disappointment in their fight for justice? Seated on a bench in a quiet corner of the terminal, far from Gate 32 and the flight that should have carried them to Boston, Zara finally pulled out her phone. Her hand trembled slightly as she navigated to her father's contact. "He's going to be in that board meeting," Nia reminded her, though her tone suggested she no longer cared about the interruption. "I know," Zara replied, "but this has gone far beyond what we can handle ourselves." She pressed the call button and put the phone on speaker. To their surprise, Marcus Jackson answered almost immediately. "Zara, everything okay, sweetheart?" His deep voice, usually so reassuring, now made both girls fight back tears. "Dad," Zara began, struggling to keep her voice steady. "We couldn't get on the flight. They wouldn't let us board." There was a moment of silence before Marcus responded, his tone careful, measured. "Tell me exactly what happened, from the beginning." For the next several minutes, the twins took turns detailing their experience. The check encounter with Trevor Reynolds, the TSA screening with Vanessa Miller, the restaurant incident with Melissa Carter and Keith Dawson, the gate confrontation with Richard Whitman and Diane Blackett, and finally, the jet bridge denial from Gregory Walsh. Throughout their account, Marcus remained silent, though they could hear his controlled breathing growing more deliberate as the story unfolded. When they mentioned how their first-class seats had been revoked, then restored, only to be taken away again at the last moment, they heard what sounded like a pen snapping in the background. "Dad?" Nia ventured when they'd finished. "Are you still there?" "I'm here," Marcus replied, his voice unnaturally calm. "Did you get the names of everyone involved?" "Yes," Zara confirmed. "We wrote down names and badge numbers whenever we could." "Good," Marcus said. "Very good." Then, after a brief pause, "Girls, there's something I need to tell you. Something I probably should have told you before you left." The twins exchanged puzzled glances. "What is it, Dad?" Marcus took a deep breath. "The reason I was so insistent about you flying mid-Atlantic, the reason I got you first-class tickets, it's because I'm the new CEO of Mid-Atlantic Airlines." Stunned silence filled the air between them. "You're what?" Nia finally managed. "I was appointed 6 weeks ago," Marcus explained. "The board brought me in to turn the company around after their previous leadership issues, but I wanted to assess the airline's culture authentically, without my position influencing how staff behaved. That's why I kept it quiet, why I used my private account to book your tickets instead of using the executive travel system." "Wait," Zara interjected. "So the whole time we were being treated like this?" "You were the CEO's daughters," Marcus finished, his voice tight with controlled fury. being discriminated against by people who had no idea who you were or who they were really dealing with. "What are we supposed to do now?" Nia asked. "Our flight's gone, and even if we could get another one." "Don't move," Marcus instructed. "Stay exactly where you are. I'm implementing emergency protocol Alpha right now. You'll see what that means very shortly, and keep your phone on. Record everything that happens from this point forward." The line went silent for a moment as they heard their father issuing rapid commands to someone else in the room with him. When he returned to the call, his voice had a steel edge they'd rarely heard before. "In about 2 minutes, you're going to start getting calls from airline executives. They're going to offer you everything under the sun. Private jets, helicopter transfers, luxury accommodations. Don't accept anything. Tell them you're waiting for my direct instructions only. Understand?" "Yes," the twins replied in unison, still trying to process this stunning revelation. "Good. Stay strong. I'll be in constant contact and this will all be over soon. I love you both." The call ended, leaving the twins staring at each other in disbelief. True to their father's prediction, Zara's phone rang barely a minute later. The caller ID showed Mid-Atlantic Airlines executive office. Before she could answer, Nia's phone also began ringing with a similar caller ID. As predicted, the voices on the other end were panicked airline executives offering immediate assistance, private transportation, anything and everything to make amends for the unfortunate misunderstanding. Following their father's instructions, the twins politely but firmly declined all offers, stating they were awaiting direct instructions from Marcus Jackson only. Just as they ended these calls, a familiar figure came hurrying toward them. Richard Whitman, the gate agent who had blocked their boarding just 30 minutes earlier, was approaching with an entirely different demeanor. His previous contempt had been replaced by obsequious panic. Ms. Jackson, he called out, slightly out of breath from rushing. "There's been a terrible misunderstanding. We've arranged for a private corporate jet to take you to Boston immediately. If you'll just come with me." "No thank you, Mr. Whitman," Zara replied coolly. "We're waiting for direct instructions from our father." Richard's face contorted with barely concealed rage. The mention of their father clearly triggered something in him, but he struggled to maintain a veneer of professionalism. "I understand you're upset, but making false claims about your family connections isn't going to help the situation." His tone shifted, becoming threatening once again now that they were alone, away from the witnesses at the gate. In fact, making false statements about airline personnel could result in you being placed on a no-fly list. Perhaps we should discuss this somewhere more private. "Is that a threat, Mr. Whitman?" Nia asked, pulling out her phone and beginning to record. Richard's eyes widened as he noticed the active recording. From the phone's speaker, Marcus Jackson's voice suddenly emerged, as he had never hung up and had been listening to the entire exchange. "Mr. Whitman, this is Marcus Jackson, Chief Executive Officer of Mid-Atlantic Airlines and father of the young women you've been discriminating against. Everything you say is being recorded and monitored. I suggest you return to your gate and await further instructions from airline management." The color drained from Richard's face as the full implications of the situation crashed down upon him. Without another word, he turned and fled back toward Gate 32, nearly colliding with a beverage cart in his haste. The twins looked at each other, a mix of vindication and disbelief washing over them. "Dad," Zara said into the phone, "what's emergency protocol Alpha?" Marcus's voice was grim but satisfied. "Watch the departure boards. You're about to find out." The departure boards flickered throughout the terminal, drawing confused glances from travelers. Then, like dominoes falling, flight after flight began showing the same status update. Delayed gate return. The announcements began moments later, echoing through the terminal. "Attention Mid-Atlantic Airlines passengers. Due to an executive-ordered safety protocol verification, all Mid-Atlantic flights currently on the tarmac or at gates are being held. Passengers already boarded are asked to remain seated. We apologize for the inconvenience and will provide updates as they become available." All around them, confusion spread through the terminal as travelers consulted their phones, checked the boards, and approached harried-looking gate agents for explanations. The agents themselves appeared bewildered, checking their computer terminals with increasing panic as more commands filtered down from above. Through their still open phone line, the twins could hear their father issuing rapid-fire directives to what sounded like a crisis management team. I want every flight grounded, every single one. I don't care if they're halfway through taxiing. Get them back to the gates. And I want the Denver station manager in my office via video conference in 5 minutes. Dad, Nia ventured, what exactly are you doing? Exercising my authority as CEO, Marcus replied grimly. The only way to get the attention of an entire system is to shut it down. Right now, every mid-Atlantic flight across the country is returning to its gate for safety verification. That's over 300 aircraft and roughly 42,000 passengers. The scale of his response left the twins momentarily speechless. Their father had essentially paralyzed an entire airline, one of the nation's largest carriers, in response to the discrimination they had faced. Won't this cost the airline millions? Zara asked, suddenly concerned about the repercussions. It will, Marcus confirmed, which is precisely why it's going to get everyone's attention. Sometimes the only way to force change is to hit the bottom line hard enough that ignoring the problem becomes more expensive than fixing it. More announcements echoed through the terminal as the ripple effects of the grounding spread. Connecting, flights were being missed. Passengers were growing increasingly frustrated. The financial damage was mounting by the minute. Mr. Jackson, a new voice spoke through the phone. This is Harold Winters, Denver station manager. I've just been informed of the situation with your daughters. I want to personally assure you that I had no knowledge of these events, and I'm appalled by what I'm hearing. Save it, Harold, Marcus replied coldly. I don't want apologies. I want action. I want every employee who interacted with my daughters today in my virtual office in the next 10 minutes. Everyone. Check in, TSA, restaurant staff, gate personnel, all of them. Sir, we don't have authority over TSA or the restaurant. Find a way, Harold, because until I see all of those faces on my screen, every mid-Atlantic plane stays exactly where it is. While this conversation continued, a small group of airport management personnel approached the twins. They wore the strained expressions of people facing a crisis they didn't fully understand. Excuse me, the lead manager said, a woman whose name tag identified her as Patricia Reynolds, Terminal Operations Director. We need to ask you to move to a less busy area. You're causing a disruption. Nia raised an eyebrow. We're sitting quietly on a bench. How exactly are we causing a disruption? Patricia's professional smile tightened. We've received reports that your presence is connected to the current operational issues affecting Mid-Atlantic Airlines. We need to minimize passenger anxiety by removing visible sources of disturbance. You want to remove us because we're black teenagers who've been discriminated against, Zara translated bluntly, not because we're actually disturbing anyone. Patricia's smile vanished entirely. That's not what I said. This is about maintaining order during a disruption. Let me make something very clear, Zara said, holding up her phone where the call with their father was still active. This is Marcus Jackson, CEO of Mid-Atlantic Airlines. Would you like to explain to him why you're trying to remove his daughters from public view after they've been subjected to racial discrimination throughout your airport? The color drained from Patricia's face as the implications hit her. Mr. Jackson? The Marcus Jackson? She stammered. The very same, Marcus's voice confirmed from the speaker. And I'd be very interested to hear why airport management is more concerned with hiding the victims of discrimination than addressing the discrimination itself. Patricia took an involuntary step backward. There must be some misunderstanding. We had no idea. I mean, we were simply trying to... I suggest, Marcus interrupted, that you focus your efforts on gathering the personnel I've requested rather than harassing my daughters further. With mumbled apologies, the management team retreated, making urgent calls of their own as they dispersed. Throughout the terminal, the situation was escalating from inconvenience to crisis. News crews had begun to arrive, initially drawn by reports of a major airline grounding but increasingly curious about rumors of a discrimination incident triggering the shutdown. Passengers were filming with their phones, Social media was lighting up with speculation, and airline staff looked increasingly panicked as they tried to manage the situation without understanding its cause. Through it all, the twins remained, seated on their bench, watching as the consequences of their simple desire to travel while black unfolded around them. What they couldn't see was that far beyond the airport, in corporate boardrooms and executive offices, an even greater storm was brewing. In the luxurious Manhattan offices of Mid-Atlantic Airlines' largest investor, Victor Harrington slammed his fist on his mahogany desk as his assistant delivered the news. "He did what?" The assistant flinched. "Mr. Jackson has implemented emergency Protocol Alpha, sir. All Mid-Atlantic flights have been grounded for safety verification. The stock is already down 7% and falling." Victor Harrington, billionaire investor and Mid-Atlantic board member, felt his carefully constructed world trembling beneath him. He'd opposed Marcus Jackson's appointment as CEO from the beginning, arguing that the former tech executive lacked the right cultural fit for the airline industry. What he'd meant, though he would never say it directly, was that a black CEO didn't belong at the helm of a major airline. He'd been outvoted by board members desperate for Jackson's reputation as a turnaround specialist, but he'd never accepted the decision. Now, Jackson had handed him the perfect opportunity to rectify that mistake. "Get me Lawrence Pritchard at the Wall Street Journal," Victor instructed, already calculating his next moves. "Then conference in the other board members, not Jackson, everyone else." Within minutes, Victor had spun the narrative to the influential financial reporter. Marcus Jackson was having a personal meltdown, using his authority to ground an entire airline over some perceived slight to his family, potentially breaching his fiduciary duty to shareholders in the process. The story would be online within the hour. The board call proved slightly more challenging. "Victor, we don't have all the facts yet," cautioned board member Eleanor Kim. "I've known Marcus for years. He's not impulsive. If he's taken this kind of action, there must be a serious reason." "The reason is that his daughters couldn't get upgraded to first class," Victor scoffed, deliberately mischaracterizing the situation. "Now he's throwing a tantrum that's costing shareholders millions by the minute. This is exactly why I opposed his appointment. Too emotional, too focused on his personal agenda rather than company interests." "We should at least hear his side," suggested another board member. "That's what the emergency board meeting is for," Victor replied smoothly, "which I've already scheduled for 3 hours from now. In the meantime, we need to contain the damage by ending this ridiculous grounding immediately." By the time the SI Cheetah call ended, Victor had secured enough tentative support to challenge Marcus's authority at the emergency meeting. His next call was to Stephanie Reynolds, Mid-Atlantic's VP of Operations and his longtime ally within the company. "Stephanie, I need you to handle something delicate. Jackson's daughters are still at Denver International. I need them isolated and contained before they can cause any more damage." "What exactly do you want me to do?" Stephanie asked, already booking a private jet to Denver. "Get them away from public view. Offer them the VIP treatment, whatever it takes. But get them somewhere private where they can't talk to the press or post on social media. Frame it as protection from the chaos their father has caused if you have to. Just contain the situation." Stephanie understood perfectly. Victor's call to the Mid-Atlantic IT director, Calvin Hughes, was even more direct. "I need everything those girls have done today erased. Security footage, ticket records, everything. Make it look like a system glitch if anyone asks." Calvin hesitated. "Sir, that would involve altering official records." "It involves protecting this company from a rogue CEO who's abusing his authority," Victor corrected sharply. "The board will back you up. Just do it." By the time Victor Harrington hung up his final call, a comprehensive counteroffensive was underway. The airline's PR team had begun seeding stories about disruptive teenagers, causing a scene at Denver International. Social media accounts with connections to the airline were questioning the twins' character and suggesting they had manipulated their father into an overreaction. News outlets were receiving press releases emphasizing the economic impact of the grounding, while dismissing the discrimination claims as unverified allegations currently under internal review. Meanwhile, At Denver International, Stephanie Reynolds had arrived and was approaching the twins with what appeared to be genuine concern. "Zara, Nia," she greeted them warmly, as if they were old friends. "I'm Stephanie Reynolds, VP of Operations. I can't tell you how deeply disturbed I am by what I'm hearing about your experience today." Her smile seemed sincere, her body language open and sympathetic. Behind her stood 4 security guards, positioned at a discreet distance but clearly part of her entourage. "Your father asked me to personally ensure your comfort and safety while this situation is resolved," she continued. "We've prepared our VIP lounge for you away from all this chaos. Private bathrooms, comfortable seating, refreshments, anything you need." Zara, still on the phone with their father, gave Stephanie a measured look. "Dad, Stephanie Reynolds is here. She wants to take us to the VIP lounge." There was a pause before Marcus responded, his voice tinged with suspicion. "Put her on speaker." When Stephanie heard Marcus's voice, her smile faltered almost imperceptibly before she recovered. "Marcus, I'm so glad we connected. I just want to assure you that I had no idea about any of this until I got your all-staff email. I'm horrified, truly horrified, and I'm here to personally make sure your daughters are taken care of." "That's very thoughtful, Stephanie," Marcus replied, his tone carefully neutral. "But my instructions to Zara and Nia were explicit. They are to remain in public view, in the main terminal, where they can be seen by other passengers and where any interactions with airline or airport staff will have witnesses." Stephanie's smile tightened. "Of course, I understand your concern. But really, with all the commotion, it might be safer and more comfortable for them in the lounge. There's quite a media presence gathering now, and I'm sure the girls don't want to be at the center of that circus." "Actually," Nia interjected, "we're quite comfortable right here. But thank you for your concern." Stephanie's carefully crafted facade began to crack. She leaned closer to the twins, lowering her voice so that only they and their father on the phone could hear. "Listen carefully. Your father has created a major crisis for this airline. Thousands of passengers are stranded. Millions of dollars are being lost. His position is precarious right now, to say the least. The smart move for your family would be to quietly accept our hospitality and allow the adults to resolve this situation professionally." The threat beneath her words was unmistakable. "Is that a threat to my daughters, Stephanie?" Marcus asked through the phone, his voice dangerously quiet. Because it sounded remarkably like one. Stephanie straightened, realizing she had miscalculated. "Not at all, Marcus. I'm simply concerned about their well-being in this chaotic environment. Then you'll understand why they're staying exactly where they are, following my explicit instructions," Marcus replied. "And Stephanie, the next time you attempt to intimidate my children, clear out your office first. It will save you a trip back to collect your things later." The line went dead, leaving Stephanie staring at the twins with barely concealed fury. Without another word, she turned and walked away, the security detail following in her wake. "Did Dad just fire her?" Nia whispered to her sister. "I think he just promised to," Zara replied, watching Stephanie's retreating form. What they couldn't see was Stephanie immediately pulling out her phone to call Victor Harrington, reporting that direct intimidation had failed and recommending they accelerate to more aggressive tactics. What they also couldn't know was that their social media accounts were already under attack, with fabricated posts appearing from months ago to paint them as entitled troublemakers. The battle was expanding beyond the airport, beyond even the airline, into a broader war of narratives and power. And somewhere in the digital realm, the next key confrontation was about to begin. Have you ever witnessed someone powerful try to cover up discrimination instead of addressing it? Comment number 1, if you've seen corporations protect their image rather than fix their problems. Or comment number 2, if you've experienced retaliation for speaking up about injustice. If this story has opened your eyes to how discrimination can be systematically denied and dismissed, hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories that expose these hidden truths. What do you think will happen in the digital battlefield? Will the twins find a way to preserve the evidence, or will corporate power succeed in erasing what happened to them? While the twins maintained their visible position in the terminal, a different kind of warfare was being waged in the digital realm. Calvin Hughes, Mid-Atlantic's IT director, sat in his office staring at his computer screen with growing unease. Victor Harrington's instructions had been clear: erase all digital evidence of the discrimination the Jackson twins had faced. But something about the request felt wrong, not just ethically, but professionally. He'd worked at Mid-Atlantic for 15 years, building his career on integrity and technical excellence. Now he was being asked to compromise both. As he hesitated, his phone buzzed with a text from Harrington. Status update. The pressure was mounting. Reluctantly, Calvin began the process, accessing the security camera systems first. He could mark footage as corrupted, a common enough occurrence that it wouldn't raise immediate red flags. But as he initiated the command, a notification popped up on his screen. Access denied, security protocol alpha active. Calvin frowned. He had administrative privileges that should override any standard security protocols. He tried again, with the same result. Then he noticed something else. A small icon in the corner of his screen indicating active monitoring of his system. Someone was watching his actions in real time. His phone rang, displaying an unfamiliar number. "Mr. Hughes," came the voice when he answered. "This is Zara Jackson. I believe you're trying to access security footage from Denver International Airport." Calvin nearly dropped the phone in shock. "How did you get this number? How are you monitoring my system?" "I'm something of a programmer myself," Zara replied calmly. "Dad's mentioned you before, said you were one of the most ethical people in the IT department. That's why I'm calling instead of just logging your attempts to alter evidence." Calvin's mind raced. He hadn't considered that Marcus Jackson's daughter might have technical skills of her own. "Look, this is a misunderstanding," he began. But Zara cut him off. "No misunderstanding. I've been backing up evidence all day. Every interaction, every recording, every ticket change is stored on a secure cloud server that neither you nor Mr. Harrington can access. I've also written a script that's scanning social media for any altered posts supposedly from our accounts. Did you know impersonation is a federal offense, Mr. Hughes?" Calvin felt sweat beading on his forehead. "I'm just following orders," he said weakly. "From Victor Harrington, not from the CEO," Zara corrected. "You have a choice right now. You can continue trying to erase evidence of racial discrimination, which is itself illegal, or you can do the right thing." Back at the airport, the twins were putting their own technical skills to work. While Zara had been handling the IT director, Nia had been reaching out to witnesses they'd encountered throughout the day. Elena Rodriguez, the kind waitress from the restaurant, had responded immediately, sending videos she'd secretly recorded of Keith making racist comments after the twins had left. "Keith told me to stop helping those people because they don't belong in first-class establishments," Elena wrote. "I've been documenting his behavior for months. I've attached all my recordings. Other passengers who had witnessed their treatment at the gate were finding them on social media, sending their own recordings and statements of support. The digital evidence was mounting, creating a counter-narrative to the one Harrington was trying to establish. Meanwhile, the attack on their reputation intensified. Fabricated social media posts supposedly from the twins' accounts began circulating, showing them bragging about manipulating their father, making racist comments of their own, and displaying entitled behavior. Their high school records were somehow leaked, though with false information about disciplinary issues inserted. Zara, anticipating this move, had already contacted their school's IT administrator, a woman who had mentored her in coding. Together, they verified and published the twins' actual school records, complete with their principal's statement confirming the documents had been tampered with by outside forces. The battle extended to news coverage as well. Major outlets were running competing stories, some focusing on the economic impact of the grounding, others examining the discrimination allegations with increasing seriousness as more witnesses came forward. The tide of public opinion was beginning to shift as the twins' systematic documentation of their experience became harder to dismiss. Calvin Hughes made his decision. Instead of erasing footage, he began securing it, placing copies on protected servers where even executive access couldn't delete them. He sent Marcus Jackson a direct message. "I'm securing the evidence, not destroying it. I'll testify if needed." It was a career-risking move, but as he watched the fabricated attacks on two teenage girls escalate, He couldn't be part of it any longer. By evening, what had begun as an attempt to silence and discredit the twins had transformed into a digital uprising. Airline employees from across the country began sharing their own experiences with discrimination at Mid-Atlantic, both as employees and as witnesses to passenger mistreatment. The hashtag Mid-Atlantic discrimination was trending nationally, with thousands of stories emerging by the hour. Victor Harrington's counteroffensive had backfired spectacularly. Rather than isolating the twins' experience as an anomaly, his aggressive tactics had opened the floodgates to a much larger pattern of behavior that could no longer be contained. And in a corporate boardroom, the emergency meeting that he had called to remove Marcus Jackson was about to begin. The Mid-Atlantic Airlines emergency board meeting convened virtually, with 14 grim-faced executives appearing on screens. Victor Harrington wasted no time in taking control of the narrative. "Colleagues, we face an unprecedented crisis," he began, his voice grave. "Our CEO has grounded our entire fleet over what appears to be a personal family matter, potentially violating his fiduciary duty to this company and its shareholders. The stock has fallen 12% and continues to drop. We must act decisively." Several board members nodded in agreement, their concern evident. Victor continued, building his case methodically. "I move that we temporarily relieve Marcus Jackson of his duties pending a full investigation into his actions today. This isn't about race, as some are already suggesting in the media. This is about sound business judgment." Before anyone could second the motion, Marcus Jackson appeared on screen, his expression calm but determined. "Before you vote on Mr. Harrington's motion, I believe you should have all the facts." He pressed a button and his screen was replaced by a series of documents and images. "What you're seeing is a preliminary report on discrimination complaints against Mid-Atlantic Airlines over the past 5 years." The board members leaned closer to their screens, expressions shifting from annoyance to concern as they absorbed the information. "Discrimination complaints against our airline are 340% higher than the industry average," Marcus continued, his voice steady. "Internal reports documenting this pattern were systematically buried by previous management, many of whom were appointed by Mr. Harrington during his time as executive chairman." Victor's face flushed with anger. "This is a distraction from the matter at hand," he interrupted. "Your emotional overreaction to your daughter's experience is costing this company millions." "My daughter's experience was not an isolated incident," Marcus countered. "It was a textbook example of the discriminatory culture that has festered within this airline for years. A culture that represents a massive legal and financial liability that has been concealed from this board and from shareholders." He switched to another screen, showing pending legal actions against the airline. "These discrimination lawsuits represent potential liabilities exceeding $800 million, none of which have been properly disclosed in our financial statements. That, Mr. Harrington, is a breach of fiduciary duty." The room fell, silent as board members processed this revelation. Eleanor Kim was the first to recover. "Marcus, are you saying you were aware of these issues before today?" Marcus nodded. "When the board hired me 6 weeks ago to turn this airline around, I began a quiet investigation into company culture and practices. What I found was disturbing: systematic discrimination, buried complaints, and a pattern of intimidation against employees who spoke up." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I was preparing a comprehensive plan to address these issues when my daughters experienced exactly the kind of treatment I'd been documenting. Their experience wasn't the reason for my actions today, it was the catalyst. I used Emergency Protocol Alpha because this company has reached a crisis point that requires immediate intervention." Several board members were now watching Victor Harrington with new suspicion. Marcus pressed his advantage. "Furthermore, since implementing the protocol, I've discovered attempts to destroy evidence, intimidate witnesses, and spread false information about my daughters online, all of which appear to trace back to Mr. Harrington's office." Victor's face contorted with rage. "This is absurd. You're making wild accusations to cover for your own incompetence. If you continue with these slanderous claims, I'll use every resource at my disposal to destroy you, Jackson. Your reputation, your daughter's futures, everything." The threat hung in the air for a moment before Marcus smiled coldly. Thank you for that, Victor. I should mention that this entire meeting is being recorded as per company bylaws section 4.7, which requires documentation of all emergency board sessions. He paused. Would you like to rephrase your threat against my teenage daughters, or shall we let it stand for the record? Victor realized too late that he had walked into a trap. His carefully constructed facade of reasonable concern had crumbled, revealing the uglier truth beneath. Board members who had been leaning toward his position were now shifting uncomfortably, distancing themselves from his increasingly unhinged demeanor. Here's what's going to happen, Marcus continued, his voice level but authoritative. I'm implementing a comprehensive anti-discrimination program throughout Mid-Atlantic, effective immediately. Every employee will undergo mandatory training. A third party will investigate all past complaints, and our financial disclosures will be amended to properly reflect our legal liabilities. He looked directly at Victor. As for your motion to remove me, I welcome the vote. But first, let me be clear. If I'm removed, my first call will be to the SEC regarding the deliberate concealment of material financial liabilities from shareholders. My second will be to the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division regarding the systematic pattern of discrimination and subsequent cover-up attempts. The boardroom fell silent. Victor Harrington's motion died without a second. One by one, board members voiced their support for Marcus's plan, eager to distance themselves from what was clearly becoming a legal and public relations disaster. By the meeting's end, even Victor had been forced to abstain rather than stand, alone in opposition. As the virtual meeting concluded, Marcus remained online with the board chair, Eleanor Kim. That was masterfully handled, she admitted. But the real challenge is just beginning. Changing a corporate culture this deeply ingrained won't happen overnight. I know, Marcus agreed. That's why the next phase is so important. This can't just be about punishment. It has to be about transformation. Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. And your daughters? How are they holding up through all this? Marcus's professional demeanor softened slightly. They're extraordinary, brave, principled, and apparently quite skilled at digital security. A hint of paternal pride crept into his voice. They've been gathering evidence all day, building a case that even our legal team would be proud of. They take after their father, Eleanor observed. What happens now? Now, Marcus said, his determination evident. We bring everything into the light. No more cover-ups, no more denial. It's time for a public reckoning. The Mid-Atlantic Airlines story exploded across national news the following morning. What had begun as coverage of an unusual airline grounding had transformed into a major story about corporate discrimination after the twins, with their father's blessing, published a detailed account of their experience alongside the evidence they'd gathered. Their post, simply titled, "What Happened to Us at Mid-Atlantic Airlines," laid out each incident chronologically, supported by witness statements, recordings, timestamps, and documentation. It was measured in tone, factual rather than accusatory, and devastatingly effective because of that restraint. Within hours, Flagger Mid-Atlantic discrimination was the top trending topic nationally. Other victims of discrimination by the airline began sharing their stories, creating an avalanche of testimony that could no longer be dismissed as isolated incidents. Former employees joined in, describing a toxic culture where reporting discrimination was career suicide. Victor Harrington, refusing to accept defeat, launched his threatened media offensive. News outlets friendly to his business interests began questioning Marcus's competence, suggesting he had overreacted to a minor customer service issue because of personal emotional involvement. Conservative commentators hinted that the twins had provoked the incidents, behaving in ways that justified the staff's reactions. The narrative battle might have gained traction if not for Marcus's next move. With the twins' agreement, he released the recording of Victor Harrington's boardroom threats against his daughters. The audio clip spread virally, with millions hearing. Harrington's rage-filled voice promising to destroy two teenage girls for speaking out against discrimination. The public reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Mid-Atlantic's stock, already damaged by the grounding, plummeted further. Major shareholders began publicly distancing themselves from Harrington, with several institutional investors calling for his removal from the board. His business reputation, built over decades, began to crumble in real time. Meanwhile, the employees who had discriminated against the twins found themselves in an uncomfortable spotlight. Richard Whitman, the gate agent, gave a defensive interview to a local Denver station that only worsened his position. "I was just following procedures," he insisted, though he could not specify which procedures required him to announce a false security alert or subject the twins to extra scrutiny. Trevor Reynolds, the check-in agent, was identified in security footage deliberately changing the twins' tickets from first class to economy. When confronted by reporters outside his home, his response, "Certain people don't know how to behave," in first class was caught on camera, confirming rather than refuting the accusations of bias. The TSA launched an internal investigation into Vanessa Miller's conduct after multiple witnesses came forward describing her pattern of targeting minority passengers for invasive screenings. Restaurant manager Keith Dawson was placed on leave after Elena Rodriguez provided recordings of his racist comments about customers. By mid-afternoon, the story had reached the White House, with the press secretary confirming that the Department of Transportation would be examining Mid-Atlantic's compliance with anti-discrimination laws. Several members of Congress called for hearings on discrimination in the airline industry more broadly. Marcus Jackson finally addressed the public via a live video statement from Mid-Atlantic headquarters. With the twins seated beside him, he outlined a comprehensive plan to address discrimination within the airline. "What happened to my daughters was not an isolated incident," he stated firmly. "It was a symptom of a systemic problem that has gone unaddressed for far too long. Today, that changes." He announced a series of immediate actions: mandatory anti-discrimination training for all staff, transparent reporting of all discrimination complaints, establishment of a passenger bill of rights, and creation of an independent review board, with real authority to investigate complaints and recommend disciplinary actions. Perhaps most surprisingly, he announced that the employees directly involved in discriminating against his daughters would not be summarily fired. Termination might feel satisfying in the moment, he explained, but it doesn't solve the underlying problem. Instead, these employees will participate in creating and implementing our new anti-discrimination training program, with their salaries during this period donated to civil rights organizations. True change requires education and accountability, not just punishment. The reaction to Marcus's approach was mixed. Some praised his focus on systemic change rather than individual scapegoating, while others felt the employees deserved immediate termination. The twins themselves supported their father's decision, with Nia explaining in a brief statement, "This isn't about ruining individual careers. It's about changing a system that encourages and rewards discrimination." Victor Harrington made one final power move, calling in favors from airline partners and major corporate customers to pressure Mid-Atlantic. Several partner airlines threatened to end codeshare agreements. Business travel accounts worth millions warned they might take their business elsewhere if Marcus remained in control. The message was clear: the industry would close ranks against an outsider who threatened to expose and change their practices. Marcus's response was equally clear. He released a detailed report documenting discrimination across the airline industry, with data suggesting Mid-Atlantic's problems, while severe, were not unique. "This is larger than one airline," he stated. "This is an industry-wide failure that requires industry-wide reform. Companies can either lead that change or be dragged into it by regulation and litigation. The choice is theirs." By evening, the public narrative had shifted definitively. What Harrington had tried to frame as an executive's emotional overreaction was now widely understood as a necessary intervention against entrenched discrimination. The twins, initially portrayed by some as entitled teenagers causing trouble, were increasingly seen as principled young women who had exposed an ugly truth that could no longer be ignored. As darkness fell, Victor Harrington sat alone in his office, watching his carefully constructed world collapse around him. His phone, once constantly buzzing with calls from powerful allies, had fallen silent. In boardrooms across the country, executives were distancing themselves, deleting his contact information, declining his calls. The message was clear. Victor Harrington had become toxic, a liability rather than an asset. His power, once seemingly unassailable, had evaporated in a single day. And it had all started because two teenage girls had simply wanted to board a plane for which they had legitimate tickets. 6 months later, Zara and Nia Jackson stood at Mid-Atlantic Airlines Gate 32 at Denver International Airport, the very same gate where they had been denied boarding half a year earlier. This time, the atmosphere couldn't have been more different. The gate agent, a young South Asian woman named Priya Sharma, checked their boarding passes with a warm smile. "Good afternoon, ladies. Boston today?" She handed back their IDs without excessive scrutiny, treating them with the same casual efficiency she showed every passenger. The twins exchanged glances. This ordinary interaction, unremarkable to most travelers, represented a profound change from their previous experience. They boarded the aircraft without incident, settling into their first-class seats as other passengers filed past. The transformation of Mid-Atlantic Airlines over the preceding months had been remarkable, if not without challenges. The day after their experience had gone public, Marcus Jackson had made good on his promise not to simply fire the employees involved. Instead, he had created what became known as the Accountability Council, a diverse group tasked with redesigning the airline's approach to customer service and anti-discrimination. Richard Whitman, Trevor Reynolds, Gregory Walsh, and Diane Blackett had all initially resisted participation, viewing it as a humiliating punishment. But Marcus had given them a simple choice: participate genuinely in creating change or face termination and potential legal action. Reluctantly, they had joined the council, alongside civil rights experts, customer service specialists, and former victims of discrimination. The early council meetings had been tense, with the employees defensive and the discrimination victims angry. Progress had been slow and painful, but over time, something unexpected had emerged: genuine transformation. Forced to listen to story after story of discriminatory treatment to face the harm their actions had caused, the employees had begun to recognize patterns in their own behavior they had previously rationalized away. Diane Blackett had experienced perhaps the most profound change. As a Black woman who had adapted to a biased system by enforcing its rules against her own community, she had carried perhaps the heaviest burden of cognitive dissonance. Her breakthrough had come during a particularly difficult council session, when a young Black flight attendant had described being told by a supervisor to tone down her natural hairstyle because it made some passengers uncomfortable. "I said those exact words to a new hire last year," Diane had admitted, her voice breaking. "I told myself I was helping her succeed in the real world, but I was just perpetuating the same system that I had to fight against." Her honest acknowledgement had marked a turning point for the council's work. Now, 6 months later, Mid-Atlantic had implemented the most comprehensive anti-discrimination program in the industry. Every employee underwent mandatory training that went beyond superficial diversity exercises to address unconscious bias and bystander intervention. An anonymous reporting system allowed passengers and employees to flag concerning interactions without fear of retaliation. Most importantly, these reports were taken seriously, with real consequences for verified discrimination. The airline had also made structural changes. Hiring and promotion practices were redesigned to reduce bias. Customer satisfaction metrics were adjusted to ensure they didn't penalize employees for enforcing rules equally across all passenger demographics. And perhaps most significantly, upper management compensation was now partially tied to discrimination metrics, creating financial incentives for executives to take the issue seriously. Financial analysts had initially predicted disaster, with some forecasting that Mid-Atlantic would lose up to 20% of its market value as it diverted resources to social justice rather than operational efficiency. Victor Harrington, who had been forced to resign from the board after shareholder pressure, had been particularly vocal in predicting the airline's downfall. But something unexpected had happened instead. After an initial period of adjustment, Mid-Atlantic's customer satisfaction scores had begun to rise across all demographic groups. Employee retention improved as staff reported feeling more valued and less conflicted about their work environment. The anticipated mass exodus of business customers never materialized. In fact, several major corporations specifically switched their travel contracts to Mid-Atlantic, citing its ethical leadership as aligning with their own corporate values. The twins' Boston flight was approaching its final descent when the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing at Boston Logan International in about 15 minutes. Current weather is sunny and 48 degrees. On behalf of myself and First Officer Rodriguez, as well as our cabin crew led by Diane Blackett, thank you for flying with us today." Nia glanced up in surprise at the familiar name. Moments later, Diane herself appeared from the forward cabin, making a final check before landing. She paused beside the twin seats. "Zara, Nia," she said quietly, "I wanted to thank you personally. I know this is your first flight with us since everything happened. What you did changed this airline, changed all of us. It couldn't have been easy to stand your ground that day." The twins hadn't expected this. They had chosen this flight for their college visits deliberately, facing the scene of their previous humiliation as a form of closure. But they hadn't anticipated such a direct acknowledgement. "It wasn't easy," Zara agreed, "but necessary things rarely are." Diane nodded. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry for my part in it. I told myself I was helping you by teaching you to accept discrimination rather than fight it. I was wrong, and you showed me that." After Diane returned to her station, Nia turned to her sister. "Did you ever imagine, when we were sitting in this terminal 6 months ago, that this would be the outcome?" Zara shook her head. "I was just hoping to get to Boston and tour some colleges. I never expected to help transform an entire airline. Or start an industry-wide reckoning," Nia added. Following Mid-Atlantic's lead, several other major carriers had implemented their own anti-discrimination initiatives, though none as comprehensive. The Department of Transportation had launched formal investigations into discriminatory practices across the industry. Congressional hearings had put airline executives on the hot seat, forcing public commitments to change. As the aircraft touched down smoothly on Boston's runway, Zara thought about the journey that had brought them here. The discrimination they had faced had been real and painful. The battle afterward had been exhausting, but the outcome had exceeded anything they could have imagined. Their father had told them something during the darkest days of the public controversy that now seemed prophetic. Transformation comes through fire. The systems that need changing most will fight hardest against that change. But if you stand firm in your truth, even when it's difficult, even when it's costly, you create the possibility for something better to emerge from the ashes. As they collected their belongings and prepared to disembark, Zara caught sight of a young black girl, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, seated with her family in economy. The child was looking around the cabin with excitement rather than apprehension, experiencing air travel as the adventure it should be, rather than a gauntlet of potential humiliation. That child would never know what had happened at Gate 32-6 months ago. She would never know the battles fought and won before she ever set foot on a plane, but she would benefit from them nonetheless, moving through the world with one less barrier, one less source of fear. And in that moment, Zara knew that everything they had endured had been worth it. The twins stepped off the aircraft into their future, forever changed by their past but not defined by it. Behind them, a transformed airline continued its own journey of evolution. And somewhere in corporate boardrooms across America, executives were learning a powerful lesson. Discrimination wasn't just morally wrong, it was bad business. The world was changing with or without them. Those who adapted would thrive. Those who resisted would be left behind, relics of a past that fewer and fewer people were willing to accept. As Marcus Jackson had told the final emergency board meeting 6 months earlier, "This isn't about politics or ideology. This is about treating people with basic human dignity. Any company that can't grasp that fundamental principle doesn't deserve to survive in the 21st century." Mid-Atlantic Airlines had grasped that principle, painfully but thoroughly. And in doing so, it had secured not just its moral standing, but its economic future. The transformation through fire was complete, and it had all begun because 2 teenage girls had refused to accept being invisible. This story of Zara and Nia Jackson's journey through discrimination and transformation offers powerful lessons that resonate beyond their individual experience. First, it demonstrates that systemic discrimination often remains invisible until directly challenged. What appeared as isolated incidents to casual observers was revealed as part of a pervasive pattern affecting countless others. Second, the twins show us the importance of documentation and evidence in fighting discrimination. They're methodical. Recording of names, incidents, and collecting witness statements proved crucial in establishing the truth against attempts to discredit them. In today's digital age, evidence is a powerful weapon against gaslighting and denial. Third, this story illustrates how change requires both leadership and pressure from below. Marcus Jackson's position gave him the power to force institutional change, but it was his daughter's experience and courage that catalyzed his action. True transformation often begins with those who have the least power, but the most at stake. Perhaps most importantly, the story challenges the false dichotomy between ethics and economics. The conventional wisdom that addressing discrimination hurts business proved not just wrong, but backwards. Mid-Atlantic became stronger, more profitable, and more respected precisely because it confronted its biases, rather than hiding them. Finally, we learned that meaningful change isn't about punishing individuals but transforming systems. By focusing on education, accountability, and structural reform rather than simple termination, Mid-Atlantic created sustainable change that rippled throughout an industry. These lessons remind us that fighting discrimination isn't just morally necessary. It's essential for creating institutions that truly serve everyone with dignity and respect. What moments in your life have you witnessed discrimination and wished you could make a difference? Have you ever been in a situation where speaking up seemed impossible but necessary? Comment below with your experiences or thoughts on how we can all contribute to creating more equitable systems in our daily lives. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to help others find it, and subscribe for more powerful narratives that explore important social issues. Share this video with someone who needs to understand that individual courage can spark systemic change. Thank you for listening to Zara and Nia's journey. Remember, transformation begins with those brave enough to stand in their truth even when it's difficult. May we all find that courage when it matters most.